Okay, so greetings to everybody out there, man. Peace and power, elevation be to all of you. This your girl Tiffany coming through live in effect right here on the StreamYard. If you're watching from YouTube, please make sure you share and subscribe and like this channel. If you if you like what you're watching, if you like the content, you can go ahead and share this channel. If you're watching from Facebook, go ahead and share this video. So what I want to do today, I want to deal with daily Black history. So I always try to do things in chronological order on the events that took place on these particular day. So because we don't get enough exposure of our history, um, and we want to be able to give credit to those who deserve it. And most of the time, we have a lot of unsung heroes in our history that are not talked about as much and not being discussed a lot. So as you can see, the topic is dealing with it's going to be dealing with two people. So one is going to be dealing with Sarah Bickford. Sarah Bidford was a entrepreneur, and also the second topic is going to deal with um, Franz Fanon. Franz Fanon was a psychiatrist, and this is his born day. Um, Sarah Bickford died on July the 19th of 1931. So we want to be able to honor those legacies and life of those individuals. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Oh, all right. So this lady right here, this is the young version of her. This is Sarah Bickford. Sarah Bickford is who we're going to be talking about, and we're going to look at her biography and what she has done. So this is her again. So now we're going to take a look at her biography. And it says Sarah. All right. So she was born possibly 1852. They don't know her day of birth. She was born into slavery, either in Tennessee or North Carolina. So again, because of that time period, they didn't have a lot of track records on, African Americans as far as like their date of birth and where they were born. Because if you were born into slavery, you didn't get a birth certificate and stuff like that. So they don't really know. All right, but it says that in the 1870s, she made her way to Montana gold fields, trade and work as a nanny for transportation. She ultimately became sole owner of the Virginia City Water Company, becoming the first and only woman in Montana and probably the nation's only a female African American to own a utility. Give me a second. All right. So, um, so yeah. Okay, getting back to what I was saying. Um, yeah, she becoming the first and only woman in Montana, and probably the nation's only female African American to own a utility. Right in 2012, the state of Montana honored her by inducing her into the gallery of outstanding Montanians. All right, so let's look at what took place in her childhood. Other than being born into slavery, Sarah Bickford's origin are uncertain. Although some sources point to her birth in North Carolina, other historians have traced Bickford's birth to Jonesboro, Tennessee, to a mother owned by John Blair III. Blair made a fortune in the 1849 California gold rush and was active in politics, serving as both a state senator and U.S. congressman. In 1860, he owned a hotel in Knoxville where Sarah, also known as Sally, likely worked. Blair died in 1863. Settling his estate is likely the reason that Sarah was separated from her family. Bickford told people that her parents were sold during the Civil War and that she never saw them again. After the Civil War, Sarah went to live with her aunt, Nancy Gammon, in Knoxville, and Gammon's husband, Isaac, who became the first African American alderman in Knoxville. Sarah took her last name, becoming Sarah Gammon. So, again, there's not much known about this woman's origin as far as where she was born. They do know that she was born into slavery. So the person that was supposed to be her owner, he was both a state senator and a U.S. congressman, right? And he owned a hotel in Knoxville, Tennessee. So let's continue. And it says life in Virginia City. Now it says New City Bakery and Restaurant. Miss Sally Brown, proprietress, board by the day or week, meals and lunches all hours. All right. So there appears to be an advertisement for her business. And it says here, in 1871, Sarah Gammon headed to Montana Territory, trading passage for work as a nanny. After arriving in the gold rush town of Virginia City, then the territorial capital, she worked briefly as a chambermaid at the Madison Hotel before marrying miner John Brown in 1872. The couple had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, but the marriage was an unhappy one. Both boys died of was it diphtheria in and in 1880 Sarah sued for divorce on the grounds of abuse and abandonment. She received full custody of her 7-year-old daughter Eva. After working briefly for French Canadian immigrant Adeline Lauren, Sarah Gammon Brown opened her own business, the New City Bakery and Restaurant, regularly advertising in the local newspaper, the Madisonian. According to the advertisement, Mrs. Sally Brown, um, proprietress, offered boards by the day or week, lunch and dinner all hours, fresh bread, cake, pies, and confectionery constantly on hand. And then check this out. It says Eva Brown. Wait a minute. What you mean the video is not playing? It is playing. Hold on. Hold on, you guys. The video is playing. I'm still recording. The video is playing though. Something is wrong on your end. So yeah, it's playing. Yeah, somebody put the video is not playing. Can that be fixed? Maybe you need to go in and go out. So, cause it's playing on my end. I don't know what's. Give me a second. can that be fixed? Maybe. Yeah, the video is playing. So, and I don't know what you're talking about. This have nothing. Whatever you're talking about has nothing to do with the topic that I'm discussing. So, if you want to talk about that, you can talk about that on your own video. Okay, you make a video and you discuss what you want to discuss about. So let me get back to doing what I'm doing. And um, with that being said, you have a wonderful day. All right, peace. Okay, so anyways, I had to take care of something. Somebody said the video wasn't playing, but it was all right. There wasn't nothing wrong with the video. But going back to what I was getting back to where I was at. Eva Brown, Sarah's daughter, died at 11 in 1882. A year later, Sarah Brown married white miner and farmer Stephen Bickford. This marriage occurred before the state of Montana passed a law prohibiting interracial marriage in 1909. Other prominent interracial couples from the same era included founders of the coal mining town of Belt, Montana, John and Maddie Castner. All right, so she had three major losses. She had three children. That's what we know so far. And those three children has passed away at a very young age. So she was divorced and she remarried to a white miner named Stephen Bickford. And she had to start a whole new life. Now, at that time period, interracial marriage was very illegal. You know, it was prohibited. It was not allowed. So most states did not allow interracial couple, especially, you know, a white person married to a black person. They didn't really allow that. But we're going to go ahead and continue. So this picture right here, it says the Hangman Building owned by Bidford in the 1900s. So again, she was an entrepreneur. All right, check this out. Stephen Bidford died in 1890, leaving Sarah with four children. Three girls and a boy, and 2/3 of ownership in the Virginia City Waterworks. Sarah took an active role in the business. She took a business class by correspondence, and in 1890, she purchased the remaining third of the waterworks, becoming the sole proprietor. She also purchased a building known as the Hangman's Building because during its construction, vigilance hung 5 men they judged to be outlaws from the roof beam for her office. Bickford was hands-on manager. She visited every customer's and was her own bill collector. She remained a well-respected member of the community until her death on July 19th, 1931. So, as far as we know, this woman she was an entrepreneur pretty much all her life. She started off having her own bakery. Then she remarried, and this person owned a water company, right? And leaving the shares over to her. And she became the sole owner of Virginia City Waterworks. So let's see. There's the reference at the bottom of this page, right? Let's look at one of the reference right here that says Gallery of Outstanding Montanians, Montana Historical Society retrieved February 1st, 2016. So let's look into that information right here. All right. So let's see if they show more details here. So here's the PDF. It says Sarah Gammon Bickford, Montana's first career woman. All right. Okay, so let's see if it goes more into details. Let's read right here. It says in 1888, Stephen and uh Sarah or Stephen and Sarah Bidford purchased a 2/3 share of the water system that supplied drinking water to Virginia City. Sarah kept the books for the water company, and in 1890 they purchased a Fisher Garden, a vegetable, a vegetable and fruit farm east of Virginia City, from which she sold produce and poultry to the surrounding community. So for those of you that don't know what poultry is, that's chicken. All right. And produce is like fresh fruits and vegetables. All right. So, and it says after Stephen died in 1900, Sarah retained ownership of their interests in the Virginia City Water Company. And she also inherited a small farm, several city lots, interest in nearby gold mining claims, and one share of stock in the Southern Montana Telegraph and Electric Company. Again, this woman had multiple business. Let's see what else it says on here. She assumed control of the water company, managing all the company's matters, and acquired the remaining 1/3 share of the company. As a sole owner of the Virginia City Water Company, Sarah became the only African American woman in Montana and possibly in the United States to own a utility company. So, okay, and then what it says down here, it says, well loved by the community. Her sudden death was reported in the local paper as having cast a distant gloom over the community, which feels, in her passing, the loss of one of its most loyal party citizens and devoted mothers. All right. So again, this woman has made a name for herself. Um, it took a long time for her to earn the recognition and to be recognized as one the first African American woman to become an entrepreneur, and not only in Montana, but she also owned a utility company, so she happened to be one of the first to do so. So for those who say, well, there's no black business owners, why we don't hear about black people owning business? Well, you got one right here. You got several of them, and she happened to be one of the few. And she happened to be the one that owns a utility company. Now, how often do you hear about black people owning utilities? Not very often, right? All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the information behind brother Franz Fanon, right? So we're gonna look at brother Franz Fanon. Give me a second. All right. All right, so I'm back. Okay, so this next person that we're going to talk about is brother Franz Fanon. Brother Franz Fanon was of course a psychiatrist, right? And a strong philosopher. So he was very philosophical. Um and we're going to look into his history. Today is his born day. He was born on July 20th, 1925. So let's take a look at the information behind his life. As a matter of fact, let me show you who Franz Fanon is, first and foremost. All right. So this is Franz Fanon. That's Franz Fanon. All right. So Franz Fanon, born let's look at his biography first. Okay, Franz Fanon was born in French colony Martinique on July 20, 1925. His family occupied a social position within the Martinician society that could reasonably qualify them as part of the black bourgeoisie. Uh, Fran's father, Kasim Fanon, was a customer inspector, and his mother, Eleonore Mendelese, owned a hardware store in downtown Fort de France, the capital of Martinique. Members of this social stratum tend to strive for assimilation and identification with white French culture. Fanon was raised in this environment, learning French history as his own until his high school years, when he encountered the philosophy of negritude, taught to him by Emile Cesare, Martinique's other renowned critic of European colonization, um, politicized and torn between assimilationism of Martinique's middle class and the preoccupation with racial identity that negritude promotes. Fanon left the colony in 1943 at the age of 18 to fight the Free French forces in the waning days of World War II. So, Franz Fanon grew up in like a middle class family, right? So, obviously, his family were pretty well off. His mother owned a hardware store, and his father was a customs inspector, right? So when he was growing up, he wasn't really taught his history as an African American. I mean, as an African person or African descent. He was taught his history was dealing with France, right? Because remember, that was the French colony at that time. Martinique was, and it's in the Caribbeans, West Indies. So that's what he was taught, French history, until he got a wake up call and to learn about the negritude. So we're gonna take a quick look at what the negritude is. Let's look up negritude. Okay, so now right here I'm on wiki1.com, and now let's look up negritude. Negritude is a framework of critique and literary theory developed mainly by francophone intellectual writers and politicians of the African diaspora, right? 1930s aimed at raising and cultivating Black consciousness across Africa and its diaspora. Negritude was founded by Martitian poet Aimé Césaire Leopold Sédar Senghor, the first president of Senegal, and Leon Damas of French Guinea. Negritude intellectual disavowed colonialism and argued for the importance of a pan-African sense of being among people of African descent worldwide. The intellectual employed Marxist political philosophy in the Black radical tradition. The writers drew heavily on a surrealist literary style, and some say they were also influenced somewhat by the surrealist stylists and in their work often explored the experience of diasporic being, asserting oneself and identity, and ideas of homegoing, and belonging. Césaire poem Notebook of a Return to My Native Land is perhaps the most notable of the Negritude's work. So the concept of negritude is basically the idea of Pan-Africanism. So negritude basically preached the philosophy of the importance of Pan-Africanism and the importance of being connected to one's root, to one's native root, because they were dealing with colonialism at the time period, right? In these French colonies, and they were only taught French history, so they broke away from that spell and say, you know what, let's go back and learn more of our roots. Let's learn about our people, our history, right? So for brothers like Franz what's his name, Franz Fanon. Franz Fanon decided that this is his opportunity to go back and study more into African history and to how African people became what they were, because he discovered that, hey, this is not my history. You know, I wasn't born in France. I was born in a colony that was ran by the French people. So that would prompt him to study more into psychology field. But let's get back to his biography. Okay, so after the war, he stayed in France to study psychiatry and medicine at University in Lyons. Here he encountered baffling, simplistic anti-Black racism, so different from the complex class pre-made distinction of shade of lightness and darkness one finds in the Caribbean, which would so enrage him that he was inspired to write an essay for this alienation of Blacks, the piece of writing that would eventually become Pour Noire Masque Blancs, which means black skin, white mask, right? Black skin, white mask. So it was here too that he began to explore the Marxism and essentialist ideas that would inform the radical departure from the assimilation negritude dichotomy that Pour Noire anti-racist humanist inaugurates. All right, so and then it also mentioned that he briefly returned to the Caribbean after he finished his studies. He no longer felt at home there, and in 1953, after a stint in Paris, he accepted a position as chef de service for the, which is chief of staff for the psychiatric ward of the Blada Joinville Hospital in Algeria. The following year, 1954, marked the eruption of the Algerian War of Independence against France, an uprising directed by the Front de Libération Nationale and brutally repressed by French and armed forces. Working in a French hospital, Fernand was increasingly responsible for treating both the psychological distress of the soldiers and officers of the French army who carried out torture in order to suppress anti-colonial resistance and the trauma suffered by the Algerian torture victims, already alienated by homogenizing effects of French imperialism. By 1956, Fanon realized he could not continue to aid French efforts to put down the colonization movement that commanded his political loyalties, and he resigned his position at the hospital. So, now even as someone who's working in psychological field, right, a psychiatrist, right, that nobody ever stressed that it was an easy job, because it's not easy to deal with someone who is mentally corrupted, right? Because it can cause you to feel their energy and become mentally corrupted as well. So it was too much pressure on him, which he decided that, hey, it's time for me to go. I don't need this anymore. I can't do this. I can't, even though, and these were soldiers who fought in the Algerian War. And he said, I can't do this because these soldiers are really suffering some serious psychological issue. I got to get away from this because all of this is affecting me and it's interrupting my work. I need to go somewhere else. And so that's how he felt. He figured that it would be best for him to go somewhere else. So, and then then it says, now I'm not going to read too much of all of this, so I'm going to skip some of this, right? Okay, so let's go right here. It says, once he was no longer officially working for the French government in Algeria, Fanon was free to devote himself to the cause of Algerian independence. During this period, he was based primarily in Tunisia, where he trained nurses for the FLN, editing its newspaper El Mujahid. Or El Mujahid. Yeah, El Mujahid. And contribute articles about the movement to sympathetic publication, including Presence Africaine and Jean-Paul Sartre journal Les Timbres, Les Temps Modernes. Some of Fanon's writing from this period were published posthumously in 1964 as Per la Revolution Africaine, towards the African Revolution. In 1959, Fanon published a series of essays. I'm going to read the English part. The Year of the Algerian Revolution, which detail how the oppressed native of Algeria organized themselves into a revolutionary force. That same year, he took up a diplomatic post in the provisional Algerian government, ambassador to Ghana, and used the influence of this position to help open up supply routes for the Algerian army. It was in Ghana that Fanon was diagnosed with leukemia that would be his cause of death. All right, so let's go down here. Despite his rapidly failing health, Fanon spent 10 months of his last year of life writing the book for which he would be most remembered, Les Demes de la Terre, an indictment of the violence and savagery of colonialism, which he ends with a passionate call for a new history of humanity to be initiated by a decolonized third war. In October 1961, Fanon was brought to the United States by a CIA agent so that he could receive treatment at a National Institute of Health facility in Bidford, Maryland. He died 2 months later on December 6, 1961, reportedly still preoccupied the cause of liberty and justice for the people of the Third World. At the request of the FLN, his body was returned to Tunisia, where it was subsequently transported across the border and buried in the soil of Algerian nation for which he fought so single-mindedly during the last 5 years of his life. All right, so what I want to look at is on this says Africana phenomenology. We're gonna look at some of the things that he wrote about. All right, so we're gonna read this first paragraph right here, and it says Fanon's contribution to phenomenology gloss as a critical race discourse and an analysis of the pre-conscious forces shaping the self that organize itself around race as a founding category. Most particularly his exploitation of the existential challenges faced by Black human beings in a social world that is constituted for white human beings received its most explicit treatment in Peau Noire Masques Blancs, which means that black skin, white mask. The central metaphor of this book that Black people must wear a white mask in order to get by in a white world is reminiscence of W.E.B. Du Bois' argument that African Americans develop a double consciousness living under a white power structure, one that flatters that structure or some such, and one experience when among other African Americans. Fanon's treatment of the ways Black people respond to a social context that racialized them at the expense of our shared humanity ranges across a broader range of culture than Du Bois. However, Fanon examines how race shapes, deforms the lives of both men and women in the French Caribbean, in France, and in colonial conflicts in Africa. Africana sociologist Peggy Henry characterized Fanon's relation to Du Bois in the realm of phenomenology as one of extension of and of clarification, since he offers a more detailed investigation of how the self encounters the trauma of being categorized by others as inferior due to imposed racial identity, and how that self recuperate a sense of identity and a culture of affiliation that is independent of the racist project of an imperializing dominant culture. All right, so his works has been compared to W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, what they both have in common, let's look at their commonality. W.E.B. Du Bois grew up in a middle class family in Boston, Massachusetts, right? He went to Harvard University. Franz Fanon grew up in a middle class family, right? And his family owned businesses, right? So W.E.B. Du Bois was brainwashed, and he didn't know about Black history or African history. All he knew that he was privileged because of the family that he come from, and he didn't understand racism until he got to the South, right? So Franz Fanon, same way, he was ignorant of his culture, right? He was only thing he was taught was the French culture until he started reading works of other Black people that was from the same country that he was from, right? And read up about Negritude, which dealt with the concept of Pan-Africanism, right? So once he started learning about that, then that's when he started studying into African culture. and started reconnecting back to his roots and started going to places like Algeria. So same way with W.E.B. Du Bois. He started reconnecting with his roots and started learning about Africa and started getting into the concept of Pan-Africanism. So both of them got into the concept of Pan-Africanism. So W.E.B. Du Bois happened to pass away in Ghana, right? That was the last place he lived in. And Frantz Fanon died in America, but his body was sent back in Tanzania, and he ended up being buried in Algeria because that's where he worked, and that's where he really fought and really helped support the revolution of the Algerian people against the French people. So they both had to wake up into consciousness and be able to develop social awareness of what was going on in their environment. And they were both very philosophical, but W.E.B. Du Bois was a sociologist, whereas Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist, right? But they both were writers, and they both had the passion for their people. All right. So, but W.E.B. Du Bois argued that we live a double consciousness, meaning that we think like white people on one end, then when we get around our own people, we start to act like our own people, right? So we have to play the double consciousness role in a society. Well, as Franz Fanon's argument is that, you're a person with a black skin, but you have to hide in this white mask. So you have to disguise yourself just so you can fit in to the Eurocentric society. So they both got into the issues about race and how racial dichotomy affects black people in general. All right. Okay, so all right, so I'm gonna read this part right here real quick. All right, it says one of the most pervasive agents of the phenomenological conditioning is language. In Pornore, Fanon analyzed language as that which carries and reveals racism and culture, used as an example the symbolism of whiteness and blackness in the French language, a point that translates equally well into English linguistic habits. One cannot learn and speak this language, Fanon observed, without subconsciously accepting the cultural meaning embedded in equation of purity with whiteness and malevolence with blackness. To be white is to be good, and to be black is to be bad. While Pornore focuses on the colonizing aspect of the French language, La Cinque, on the other hand, offers an interesting account of how language might enable the colonization efforts. Fanon describes a decision made by the revolutionary forces in Algeria in 1956 to give up their previous boycott of French and instead start using it as the lingua franca that could unite diverse community of resistant, including those that did not speak Arabic. So subversive effects of adopting French extended beyond the convenience of a common language. It also cast doubt on the simplistic assumption the French colonizers had been making, namely that all French speakers in Algeria were loyal to colonial government. After strategically adopting the colonizer's language, one enter a shop or a government office no longer necessarily announcing one's politics in one's choice of language. So language shows how a person right, from another ethnic background have been colonized. So, for example, take us here in America, right? We were brought here as slaves, but we have assimilated into the American culture. And how did we assimilate into the American culture? We start to accept the language, which is English, right, as our language. Okay. But we speak what is called the standard English, American Standard English. But for us African Americans, we speak what is called Ebonics, right, or African American vernacular English. All right, so Ebonic is consists of African languages or African dialect or African tone mixed in with the English language. So you will find out when you go to like places in South Carolina, right? They speak what's called the Gullah Geechee language, and the Gullah Geechee language is nothing more than an African language mixed in with English. In Louisiana, you will find out they speak what's called Creole. All right, Creole is the combination of African languages mixed in with Native American language with French and English. So it's French, English, and African languages all combined together. That's what they speak in places like Louisiana and some parts of Texas, Creole. So, and also it has a Spanish mixture as well. So, with that being said, right, we have accepted the colonizer or the slave master's language as our own language as a people, because a lot of us don't have our native tongue, and we wouldn't know how to speak the language of our ancestors, right? We wouldn't know how to speak the language of the Yoruba, the language of the Mendika, the language of the Hausa people, the Igbo people. We don't really know their language, but we do have the accent, you know what I'm saying, like the dialect, so to speak, and it's combined with the English language. So when you come here, especially in the South, you will hear a lot of the African tongue, right? Because you hear a lot of mispronunciation of the words. So we have what is called condensed pronunciation, which is like a way that we don't fully pronunciate or enunciate the words all the way. So it becomes very condensed, more relaxed. So it's sort of like lazy. But that's just the African tongue that is mixed in with the English accent. You understand what I'm saying? So that should make sense. All right. All right. So let's also take a look at this. Fanon's critical race phenomenology is not without critics, many of whom read Pornore's back-to-back accounts of the black woman's desire for a white lover and the black man's desire for a white lover as misogynist. According to these critiques, typically offered a feminist point of view. The autobiography of Moe Capacia, a Martesian woman who seek the love of a white man, and any white man, it seems, is treated by Fanon, who described it as cut rate and ridiculous, with far less respect than the novel by Rene Moran, which describes the story of Jean Venus, a black man who reluctantly falls in love with a white French woman and hesitates to marry her until he is urged to do so by her brother. Although Fanon is unequivocal in his statement that both of these discussions serve as example of alienated psyches, white feminists who make this charge of misogyny point to his less sympathetic account of Capacia as evidence that he holds black women complicit in the devaluing of blackness, where it is found at all in the work of Black feminist writers, this allegation tends to be more tentative and tends to be conceptualized within a pluralist inventory of phenomenological approaches. Just as Fanon selects race as a founding category of phenomenology, a feminist phenomenology would focus on gender as a founding category in this pluralist framework. Fanon's attention to race at the expense of gender is arguably more was it explicable as a methodological choice than a deep-seated contempt for women. So, all right, so he has received backlash and criticism about his work, particularly from those who was in the feminist organization. They felt like, oh, you're critiquing a Black woman for dating a white man, but you not really giving as much critique on a Black man dating a white woman, or they critiqued him on both ends. So they felt like he was incompassionate towards Black women, and they felt like he was just too radical, right? So, but that was not the case with him. He was about race, and he felt like, the Black race would prosper if Black men and Black women were to unify and to focus on themselves. But many people felt like he was too harsh. All right. Okay, so I'm going to read one last thing. I'm going to read one last these two paragraphs, and then I'm going to get into a video real fast. All right, so let's look at the influences of Fanon's thought. And it says the first significant influences on Fanon's was the philosophy of negritude, to which he was introduced by Aimé Césaire. Although this philosophy of Black pride was a potent counterbalance to assimilation tendency into which Fanon had been socialized, it was ultimately an inadequate response to an imperializing culture that present itself as a universal worldwide. Far more fruitful in Fanon's view were his studies in France of Hegel, Marx, and Husserl. From these sources, he developed the view that dialectic could be the process through which the other / alienated self can respond to racist trauma in a healthy way. A sensitivity to the social and economic forces that shape human beings, and an appreciation for pre-conscious construction of self that phenomenology can reveal. He also found Sartre's existentialism a helpful resource for theorizing the process of self-construction by which each of us chooses to become the persons we are. This relation with Sartre appears to have been particularly mutually beneficial. Sartre's existentialism primates Paul Nore, and in turn, Sartre's heartfelt and radical commitment to decolonizing suggests that Fanon had quite an influence on him. All right. And so then we're going to look at this part where it says movements and thinkers influenced by Fanon. All right, so right here, it says the Pan-Africanism that Fanon understood himself to be contributing to in his work on behalf of the third world peoples never really materialized as a political movement. It must be remembered that in Fanon's day, the term third world did not have the meaning it has today. Today designates a collection of desperately poor countries that are the objects of the developed world's charity. In the 1950s and 1960s, the term indicated the hope of emerging alternative to political alliance with either the first world, the United States and Europe, or the second world, the Soviet bloc. The attempt to generate political solidarity and meaningful political power among the newly independent nations of Africa instead foundered as these former colonies fell victim to precisely the sort of false decolonization and clientis was it clientis client was it clientism that Fanon had warned against. Today, as a political program, that idea of small state solidarity survived only in the leftist critiques of neoliberalism offered by activists like Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein. Hmm. All right. And then it says, instead, the discourse of solidarity and political reconstruction has retreated into academy, where it is theorized as post-colonialism. Here we find the critical theorizing of scholars like Edward Said and Gayatri Spivak, both of whom construct analysis of the colonial self and the colonized other that implicitly at least depend on the Machiavellian Manichean division that Fanon present in Les Dames. All right. Okay. So also right here, Kenyan author and the colonization activist Ngugi wa Thongo also draw on ideas Fanon present Link Dames, inspired mainly by Fanon's meditation on the need to decolonize national consciousness. Ngugi has written of the need to get beyond the colonization of the mind that occurs in using the language of imposed powers. Like Fanon, he recognized the language. He recognized that language has a dual character. It colonized in the sense that power congeals in the history of how language is used. That is its role in carrying culture, but it can also be adapted to our real life communication and our image forming projects, which means it also always carries the potential to be means by which we liberate ourselves. In Ngungi's last book in English, The Colonizing the Mind, was his official renunciation of the colonized language in favor of his native tongue, which is Giki, what's it? Gikulu. If I'm saying it correctly, it Gikulu. Yeah, Gikulu, and its account of the politics of language in African literature can fruitfully be read as an illustration of the abstract claims Fanon makes about art and culture in Les Dames and Pour la Revolution Africaine. So, all right. So, if you guys want to look up more information about that, the website is called the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and it's a peer-reviewed academic resource. And you just look up Franz Fanon. So again, the website is called Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy if you want to look more into that information. All right. So it's a lot of detail. It's a lot of things. And also, the references are here at the bottom. References and further reading. Primary sources. You see. And secondary sources, right? So, yeah, it's a lot of information that needs to be read. I'm gonna take some time out myself and actually read more into this guy because I never really actually got a chance to look more into his information and his history. I've heard about him. I have heard that he has done things dealing with philosophy and psychology and social consciousness, but I never really actually got the chance to actually look into his work. So um, I will make it my business one of these days to actually read more into his information, and I'm gonna post up some information about him on Facebook as well. All right, so let's look at a video, right, that goes in detail to about what his philosophy, black skin and white mask. All right. So,
This lecture is about Frantz Fanon and his novel Black Skin, White Mask. I'm the Elizabeth Glasgow, and I'm your lecturer for this series. Who was Frantz Fanon? Frantz Fanon, the author of Black Skin, White Mask, was an Afro-French psychiatrist and philosopher. He was born in 1925 in Martinique. He grew up under colonial rule, and as an adult, he became a passionate critic of the racism that characterized the colonial system. Colonial racism assumed that colonized people were inferior to those of the ruling power, and that their culture and values were also inferior. Based upon these assumptions, it imposed its own culture and values on the colonized people, while according them an inferior status within the new society. Fanon experienced colonial rule from a very young age. In Martinique, he became friends with the influential poet, novelist, and political figure Aimé Césaire, a radical critic of colonialism. Fanon's ideas about racism developed further on serving with the French army during World War II, and when he moved to France to study medicine and psychiatry at the University of Lyon. He qualified as a psychiatrist in 1951 and intended to submit Black Skin, White Mask as his doctoral dissertation, but the work was considered too controversial. The university examiners rejected it, and so Fanon had the manuscript published into a book instead. In 1953, Fanon was offered a job in Algeria. The Algerian War for Independence from France began the next year. Fanon became involved with the Algerian rebel group Front de Libération Nationale in 1955, and as a result, he was expelled from the country in 1957. His experiences in Algeria had a profile of the earth. Fanon departed from the non-violent tone of Black Skin, White Mask and argued that the colonized have the right to commit violence to gain independence. In 1960, Fanon was diagnosed with leukemia. He died the following year at the age of just 36. The Wretched of the Earth was published after his death. What we're talking about today is his first novel, Black Skin, White Masks. In Black Skin, White Mask, Frantz Fanon argued that colonial racism has psychopathological effects. In other words, it fosters mentally disturbed behavior. One of the key terms he uses is the process of cultural assimilation. This is a process that occurs when the native culture of a colonized people is replaced by the culture of the colonial power. Fanon argued that this profoundly damages colonized people. This damage, felt on both a collective and an individual level, occurs in several ways. First, the culture of colonialism prevents the colonized from developing an independent sense of identity, which in turn has a negative effect on their psychological development. The second thing it does is, because Western popular culture equates whiteness with purity and goodness, and blackness with impurity and evil, the colonized people learn to equate blackness with evil. As a result, they grow up aspiring to be white. This effort to assimilate white culture and to negate their own black identity has profound psychological repercussions, according to Fanon. It results in a sense of alienation, that is, doubt as to who they truly are and with whom they should identify. Sooner or later, Fanon argued, black colonial subjects realize that they have no visible identity. Having learned from an early age that to be black is to be subhuman, they cannot identify as black. At the same time, their aspiration to be white is destined to fail, for a black person can never truly become white. Fanon argued that the upshot of this is that the colonized are caught in an impossible bind. They are both unable to celebrate their native culture and unable to achieve equality within the colonial culture. Fanon illustrated this by describing the experiences of different black people encountering their white colonizers for the first time. These stories share a common theme: the shock that black individuals experience upon realizing that, despite their Western European education and loyalty in Western European ideals, white people perceive them to be fundamentally different and inferior. Colonial culture, Fanon argued, teaches its citizens that the only way to be human is to be white. The colonized internalize this. This deeply embedded message pushes them into an agonizing psychological position. If to be human is to be white, Fanon argued, but they are not white. They are forced to see themselves as subhuman. Fanon's approach here was unique for its time. He drew upon a range of disciplines in order to build his arguments. He used Marxism, an analytical approach to social and economic questions that was developed by Karl Marx, to show that colonial racism is also a socio-economic issue. And he used the ideas of the influential French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan to show that colonialism shapes the worldview of its citizens from their earliest years of development. Fanon drew from the work of the writers and poets of the Negritude movement. This was a literary and philosophical movement developed by African writers who were residents in France and whose work was critical of French colonial rule. In Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon shows how the literature of black writers articulates the displaced identity of colonized people. He also absorbed the work of existentialist philosophers like the French intellectual Jean-Paul Sartre. Existentialism argued that individuals develop by exercising their own free will. Seen in this light, colonialism then stopped being inherently dehumanizing. Finally, Fanon used the experiences of his own psychiatric patients. These revealed the practical, visible effects of colonism on its citizens. So why does Black Skin, White Mask matter? Well, Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask was one of the first texts to examine the damaging effects of colonial racism. Fanon's work is also noteworthy for the originality of its approach, which brought together very different schools of thought, including psychology, political theory, and literary criticism. We would call that cultural studies today. Fanon turned to the aims and methods of different academic disciplines long before it became commonplace to do so. Fanon's strident, impassioned tone is also unusual for a work of academic scholarship. Black Skin, White Mask is not a dispassionate study of colonial racism. It is a call to arms that urges its black readers to take action against colonialism. For 21st century readers like ourselves, the dehumanizing effects of racism may seem self-evident. Fanon's ideas may not seem worthy of special deliberation, but when he was writing his ideas, they were very controversial. They contradicted the popular belief that colonialism was beneficial to the colonized. According to this argument, it was the duty of white people to eradicate the savage impulses of black people and to teach them civil behavior. Fanon instead asserted that colonialism was destructive, preventing colonized individuals from developing a sense of self. In making those claims, Black Skin, White Mask laid the groundwork for new disciplines, including post-colonial and human rights studies. Again, his methodological approach of using multidisciplines foretold the advent of cultural studies. Today, racism is discussed more openly. In addition, the public perception of racial inequality has shifted significantly since Fanon's day. Nonetheless, his text remains important to the discussion of race relations. Particularly, his ideas help to illuminate the subtle ways in which racism can permeate culture. And despite the advances that have been made, racism still exists. Enduring emblems of racial segregation, like the Confederate flag in the U.S., a flag associated with the desire of the Southern states to preserve the institution of slavery before the American Civil War, still cause debate. There is still controversy over the insidious role racism plays in news coverage, in crime prevention, and government policy. So in this way, Fanon's ideas are still required. I'm D. Elizabeth Glasgow. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.
All right. So that concludes today's history. Um and I hope you guys enjoyed what you was watching. If you want to support the channel, please go ahead and do so. Also, yeah, if you also check out my YouTube, which is Tiffany French. And if you're watching from Facebook, you can go ahead and share this channel. Share the video. But until then, you guys have a thank you so much, and then we'll talk later. All right, take it easy. Peace.